Greetings, ladies and gentlefish, and welcome to another tank review, and it's part 2 of Chip Fangirls about the Sherman. I'm not going to go too overboard this time, because I kind of got a little bit excited about the Tier 5 Sherman last time I did one of these reviews. So I'm going to try not to go overboard this time. We are, of course, looking at the M4A3E8, sometimes referred to as the Easy 8. This is the Tier 6 American medium tech tree tank. So, where does this thing fit in historically? Well, it's a little odd. Why am I looking at statistics? I'm such an idiot. Just going to first have a quick look at what the game thinks about this thing and where it thinks this thing fits in. M4A3E8 is one of the most mass-produced modifications of the main US armoured vehicle of the World War II period. The tank featured the welded hull and Ford GAA carburetor engine. A total of 11,424 vehicles with the improved HVSS suspension were produced by Fisher Tank Arsenal and Detroit Tank Arsenal from June 42 through to March 45. The vehicle is also known as M4A376W. It took part in many after-war conflicts up to the Indo-Pakistani War of 1965. Now, I've done that very quickly because, one, they put a relatively large amount of blurb in there, and two, as far as I can work out, it's not incorrect, but there are bits of it that were a little bit misleading. Essentially, the M4A3E8 tank that we have in-game, as many tanks in this game are, is kind of an amalgamation of a bunch of different tank variants into one, because as you upgrade the machine, you're kind of going through different variants of the tank, depending on what turret you're using, or what gun you're using, or what suspension you've got, or what engine you've got, and so on and so on and so forth. And so it actually gets a little bit confusing. It doesn't help that, of course, because there were so many Shermans produced, there are a whole bunch of different variants of this thing. So what we're essentially looking at here is kind of a late war Sherman. And the Sherman itself would be produced up until 1945. Of course, the war ended in 45, but it would actually see service and well into the 50s, which a lot of people kind of gloss over, and they suddenly think, oh, the Sherman magically disappeared and got replaced with, I don't know, the Patton or something. But no, this thing, even in the American military, served into the 50s in some capacity. So, I'm going to be a little pedantic, and I'm not a professional historian. Someone may find that I've made a mistake somewhere. That's fine, whack it down in the comments as people usually do. But a lot of people make a mistake about this thing in thinking the Easy 8 was defined by the 76mm gun. That's not quite true. There were earlier versions of the Sherman that mounted a 76mm gun. What the E8 gave you, again colloquially referred to sometimes as the Easy 8, was a combination of the 76mm gun, a wet ammo rack to deal with some of the early Sherman ammo rack related problems, and the suspension. It was this kind of wider suspension that was supposed to make the tank, I presume, more capable of crossing difficult terrain like muddy ground and whatnot. And the E8 is well, there seems to be a little bit of contention, but it's kind of it was a little bit of an experiment that ended up being successful. But the point I'm trying to make is when you look at the I should probably bring it up, the description here. So what it says here is the tank featured the welded hull and Ford carburetor engine, correct. A total of 11,424 vehicles with the improved HVSS suspension were produced by the Fisher Tank Arsenal and Detroit Tank Arsenal from June 42 through to March 45. That is true, but they're not all E8s. There are other variants of the Sherman that use this same suspension system. So, as far as I can work out, there are actually 2,000 to 3,000 E8s that were actually made during the Second World War. The 11,424 number there does include some other variants of the Sherman. As it says, it is also sometimes referred to as the M4A376 HVSS. So the HVSS refers to the suspension, the 76 refers to the calibre of the gun, and the M4A3 is kind of the model of the base tank. And this had a welded construction as opposed to some of the earlier Shermans that had been a cast construction. The advantage of using cast metal, one of the advantages was that you could sometimes manufacture it faster, because essentially you just did the cast of the hull all in one go, and that's great, and you've got a hull to go and everyone's happy. The problem is, if you take damage to it, it's really difficult to repair something that was made as a single cast piece of metal. For repairs purposes and maintenance, it's actually much easier if you have a welded, or I guess if you're British and you're weird, a riveted. The British tank industry is odd. Or was odd in the Second World War. A welded design, because it means you can just remove a panel, get a replacement panel, whack it on and weld it in place, which is a much easier thing to do. This is just... Before we get any further, this is one of my favourite tanks in the game, so again, if I sound like I'm a little bit of a yee, it's because I am. I do very much like this thing. But at the end, this thing has been around in the game for a long time without really any changes, well, not many changes, so at the end I am going to talk a little bit about how relevant I think this thing is to the modern game. So that's enough of a pre-bramble, I suppose. Let's have a quick look at things like equipment and crew skills and whatnot. Okay, so we're going to start by taking a look at the stats of the EZ8 as normal, and we're going to compare it to the T-34-85 because that's a pretty popular tier 6 medium tank, the Cromwell because a lot of people seem to compare the E8 and the Cromwell for some reason, even though I don't personally think they have a great deal in common as far as tier 6 mediums go. And what I think is probably the closest comparison to the playstyle of the E8, the Swedish tier 6 medium tank, the Stridsvagn 74. So, straight away we can see that the EZ8 has the highest DPM in this comparison, and actually the E8 has the highest base DPM of any tier 6. Certainly tech tree medium tank, and I'm pretty sure it's the highest base DPM of any tier 6 medium tank, period. It's only slightly higher than the Cromwell, but it blows the T-34 and the Stridsvagn out of the water. Penetration is on the low side. This is the same gun you were using, or you could have used at tier 5 on the Sherman, but tier 5 obviously. 128 penetration isn't very good, but it's workable, and it's not the only tank at tier 6 as a medium that has penetration down by that level, but it is a downside. The alpha damage is pretty weedy. 115 is not very much. I mean, the Cromwell isn't considered to have particularly good alpha damage, and that has 135, which is still better than the 115 of the Sherman. So, in order to get that DPM, you lose out on pen and alpha damage, pretty obviously. Module damage, 105. I mean, these are all fairly similar. The module damage is directly related to the caliber of the gun. So the T-34 has the largest caliber gun in this scenario, and hence the greatest module damage. Reload, it has the quickest reload. We could already work that out. The shell velocity of 792 is, well, it's all right for a tier 6 medium tank. It's not great, but you know, it gets the job done. Now, one thing that can bite you is, because you have such a weedy gun and a relatively high rate of fire, there's a tendency to blind fire quite a lot with this tank, and you can burn through your ammunition quickly. Combine that with the fact that the total potential damage, if all your shots hit and penetrate, is just a shade over 8,000, which, whilst not the worst, the Stridsvagn's looking easily the worst in this comparison, it's not fantastic. You can find you start running low on ammunition as a game progresses. Just something to bear in mind. Gun handling, and this is where you might expect the E8 to do really well, and it's kind of a good news, bad news situation. 2.21 aim time is the same as the T-34 and the Cromwell, but the Stridsvagn beats it hands down. Dispersion, 0.38, is just not very good, and for such a low caliber gun that's actually quite disappointing. So you have a low alpha damage, kind of low penetration, dubious accuracy. This is a gun, and not great shell velocity. This really is a gun that's designed to be used up close and personal. 0.18 dispersion when moving, 0.18 when traversing the hull, and 0.12 when traversing the turret, with 3.36 after firing. So they're not tragically bad, and they are better than the T-34-85 and the Cromwell. The Cromwell has notoriously poor gun handling in this comparison, but again, the Stridsvagn blows it out of the water with much better gun handling. Now I would like to say at this point, unlike the other three, the EZ8 in this comparison, well, the EZ8 can mount a vertical stabilizer, which will of course make those numbers better, but the Stridsvagn still blows it out the water. So the gun handling on this tank is, for a tier 6 medium tank, decent, but not best in class. And that's a little bit disappointing, I guess, for such a weedy gun in the first place. 25 degrees of gun elevation is very good. It's not used very much, but it is very good. 12 degrees of gun depression is excellent. Blows the Cromwell, blows the T-34 out of the water, but, and you can see a pattern forming here, it's not as good as the 15 degrees that the Stridsvagn gets. And they all have fully traversable turrets. So in terms of gun handling, the E8 is better than the Cromwell and the T-34, not that that takes much, but it is worse than the Swedish medium tank in this comparison. Mobility and... yeah. So, forward speed 48 kilometers an hour is a bit sluggish, worse than the T-34 and the Cromwell, but better than the Stridsvagn. Reverse speed of 18, same as the Stridsvagn, worse than the T-34 and the Cromwell. Engine power of 520 horsepower, combined with the weight of about 30 tons, essentially means you get power to weight ratio comparable with the T-34, worse than the Cromwell, but the Cromwell kind of plays a bit more like a fat light tank, and it's better than the Stridsvagn. The terrain resistances, well, again, it's kind of 6 to 1 half dozen the other. It's better than the T-34-85, it's worse than the Cromwell, and it's slightly better than the Stridsvagn. So what you get overall is mobility that is fine, but it's nothing that's going to really excite you. It feels a bit more mobile than the T-34-85, those ground resistances kind of offsetting the slightly worse power to weight ratio, but it's not a Cromwell. Mobility is slightly better than the Stridsvagn. Turret traverse, track traverse, traverse speeds are actually pretty good. The Sherman, although it's not the fastest tank in the world, for what is actually quite a big machine, it is relatively nimble, and that's a trend that you notice across the American medium tanks in general. They may not be small, but they're surprisingly agile. Armour, we're going to have a look at the armour in a moment, properly, so to speak, but tier 6 medium tanks in general are not renowned for their armour, and this is one advantage I would like to point out of the E8 compared to the Swedium. The armour on the Swedish tank is pretty tragic, especially on the turret, which is what you have to expose to shoot anyone, so go figure. 840 hit points, it's very similar to the other tanks in this comparison. Engine health, a little on the low side, but not as bad as the Swedish tank. Yeah, I mean, module hit points, no one really cares about too much in practice. Other bits, mainly camo, that we're looking at here. Now, the tank is quite tall, meaning that it has worse camo than the T-34 or the Cromwell, but better than the Stridsvagn. So, 370 meters view range is actually pretty respectable for a tier 6 medium tank, and is just enough that I think you can drop binos on this tank reasonably and be using optics instead. Although, because you've got a vert stab, unlike some of the others, you're probably not going to have optics and vents, so that kind of counterbalances a little bit. No one cares about radio range, it's good enough. Fire chance is 20%, don't get shot in the booty, and the shell cost is a pittance, but you only do 115 damage per shot, so yeah, it doesn't really matter. So that's the raw numbers of the EZ8. Let's have a quick look at the armour. So, the armour on the Sherman, this is not going to take very long. Some people might find it weird that I'm starting with the rear, but I'm just going to mention that with the rear armour of 38.1mm, that's not thin enough that you can reliably penetrate the back of this with 75mm high explosives. So, most tanks don't fire HE at this thing. The armour's enough to shrug that off, whereas you might fire HE, especially at the turret of something like the Stridsvagn. Frontal armour, oh dear. Side armour, oh dear. Well, no, let's be serious about this. So, the side armour is 38.1mm thick. What this means in practice is that it's not very good, but if you are going to have this at an auto bounce angle, so let's just angle it a little bit more, there we go, there's an auto bounce angle, well, almost. There's an auto bounce angle. As long as you are not showing the front of your tank, if someone is going to aim, if you were side scraping in this thing and someone is going to shoot at your sides, you will bounce 90mm shells with this, which is nice. Now, you're not going to bounce 120mm shells, so if an IS or an SU-122, SU-100, that's what I was trying to think of, or one of those, you know, big Soviet or Chinese guns is pointing at you, don't side scrape in front of it, it's going to go through you like wet tissue paper. And even if you are side scraping, don't expect to bounce things anyway, because people can just shoot you in the turret, which we'll get onto in a second. But I'm just pointing out, if you do side scrape, those sort of 75, 76, 90mm guns will bounce on you. 85mm guns, the British 20 and 32 pounders, they won't overmatch, completely at least overmatch your armour. If, however, you are not technically an auto bounce, that's when things can start getting bad, because anything that is a, maths time, 77mm gun or greater will double overmatch your side armour. 76mm won't do it because it's 38.1, but 77mm guns will do it. Now, you might go, Chip, 77? What are you talking about? There aren't any 77mm guns in the game. Well, I can't remember the exact caliber, but the Comet does technically have a 77mm gun, but I can't remember the exact shell caliber off the top of my head. But it's just something worth bearing in mind. But side scraping in this thing, as a general rule of thumb, is not really very advisable. Frontal Armor, well, I mean, it's reasonably angled, but, yeah, maybe you'll bounce the odd tier 4 here or there, but that's about it. Turret is also not great, and you've got a cupola on top so people can pen you. Now, the gun mantlet is a slightly different story. The gun mantlet these days will get you about 180mm of effective armor, so that can bounce things. So, the best way to use the armor on this tank, and you're going to get used to this in your American medium tanks, is to go hull down. If you are using your 12 degrees of gun depression and you are hull down, so you're only really showing your turret and maybe your upper frontal hull, it can be a slightly different story. Turret cheeks are still not going to get more than about 100mm of effective armour. Your gun mantlet is still around 180 up to 200mm, so that can bounce. And your upper hull, well, don't expect miracles from it, but at least it's getting up to around 100mm. So, if you want to bounce anything in the Sherman here, 12 degrees of gun depression, use it, only show your turret, and your mantlet will bounce things. Just don't expect miracles from it. The armour isn't that good. So if we have a quick look at the Grinderino, I suppose, you're going to have these guns already unlocked from the Tier 5 Sherman. You could use the howitzer on this thing if you wanted to, but I wouldn't recommend it, and hence I have not made the comparison with this using the howitzer. I've assumed you're using the 76mm. You can use this 76mm from the M4A1, so either of these guns should be okay for grinding purposes, and so I wouldn't prioritise the gun on this thing if I'm being honest. I would prioritise other things. So, this middle engine you'll already have from the Tier 5 Sherman, so you don't have to play this thing completely stock. Hoorah! The top engine is a slightly different kettle of fish, unless you've played, say, the Jumbo, which is these days a collector's vehicle. You won't already have this engine unlocked. Having said that, you go from 460 horsepower up to 520. The weight does get greater, but only by a little bit. So, yeah, it's a definite worthy upgrade. I would suggest, and obviously the tracks are going to be unique to this thing, and the radio is used on a whole bunch of tanks, like you'll probably already have this. So my suggestion would be initially focus on the engine and tracks. Make this thing as mobile and agile as you can, then get the turret, then get the top gun. That is my suggestion when it comes to grinding this beastie. Equipment. First thing to note, one of the advantages of the Shermans at Tier 6 is that unlike most other Tier 6 tanks, they can mount a vertical stabilizer, which is good. Improved dispersion on the move, and of course that means just after you've moved your gun's going to aim faster. We'll take that. So I've got a vertical stabilizer, I've got a gun rammer, and I've got coated optics. Now you may have noticed a bit of perhaps a problem with this setup is an exaggeration, but this does not make use of the mobility slot that you've got here. Now the thing with this thing is, so vertical stabilizer, this is really a selling point of this tank, and I do think if you're not mounting a vert stab on the tier 6 Sherman here, you are doing it wrong. Gun rammer, sorry, especially because the gun has such a high rate of fire, you have to shoot a lot to make the people die. Gun rammer, DPM is one of the selling points of this tank, so double down on it with a gun rammer. Optics, originally I used to run vents on this thing, way back in the dawny mists of time, to double down on the DPM. The problem with that is that your view range ends up being a bit dodgy. 370 base meter view range for a tier 6 medium is very, very respectable, but in the grand scheme of things it's still not amazing. So I use coated optics to increase that, but even with coated optics, and with Brothers in Arms, and with situational awareness up to 82%, I do not yet have recon on this crew. I'm still only up to a 428 meter view range. Now I say only, that's not bad, but it's not as high as I would like it. So, you could make a case, I think, for swapping, say, the optics out for binos. In fact, let's have a look at some other bits of kit you might choose to use. Improved vents. Like I said, this is going to give your tank an all-round boost, and if you put it in the mobility slot, that of course will be doubled down on. That's nice, but are you going to sacrifice gun handling? Are you going to sacrifice DPM? Or are you going to sacrifice view range for that? I came to the conclusion I preferred to have the view range. It's much more useful, especially in those bottom tier matchups, when you're thinking, my gun's a little weedy, what am I going to do? Improve rotation mechanism. Well, if you were to take this and put it in the mobility slot and have vert stabs and, say, a gun rammer, then you can really double down on the gun handling. In fact, if you swapped a gun rammer out for vents, your gun handling would be even better. But you're putting all your eggs in one basket. Your view range is going to suck, and you have to make some sacrifices there. So you could do it, but I can't really bring myself to recommend it. What else might you want to use? You might want to use a turbo, because this thing isn't the fastest tank in the world, and that would make it faster, and faster is good. But it's not the slowest tank in the world, and I don't think it needs a turbo. And again, are you going to sacrifice optics, rammer, or vert stabs for a turbo? I think you'd struggle to make that case. The only change I would be tempted to make, I'm not going to, but I might make, is to swap the optics out for binocular telescopes, because that would massively increase your view range, of course, but you have to be stationary for a few seconds before they activate. So, I would, in my opinion, this is the best all-round equipment setup for the Sherman. Now, what might change this, of course, is if you were using bounty equipment or bond equipment on this thing, for some reason, rather than on your tier 10s, then obviously the parameters of the tank are going to be increased to such a point that you might think you can make sacrifices. Maybe you could drop the optics in exchange for, like, I don't know, bond vents or bounty vents, and a food consumable, and a really good crew, and blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah. And you might actually get a very decent view range, or fairly decent view range that way. But I think for most players here at tier 6, that's not really a sensible option. And so I would say this equipment setup is probably your best one. One thing I would note is, I'm going to point it out now because I didn't say it when we were looking at the stats, the penetration on the APCR rounds that this tank has as its gold rounds is 177 as average, which is fine for a tier 6 medium tank, but it's not amazing. And the HE is not really very good. And so to the point that I don't even have HE on here at all. Your HE rounds, 185 average damage, 38 average penetration. They're so situational that I actually find myself burning through enough of the ammunition on this tank that I'm more worried about running out of AP or APCR ammo than I am about not having HE. So, you might take a few rounds of high explosive. I'm not. 76mm HE isn't the best, let's be honest. The one thing I will say about this tank, if you're going to play it, there are some tanks, I've seen people do this with Cromwells, and they'll just double down and load up on the gold, sit at the back of the map, and snipe people from a distance. You can't really do that with this tank. The penetration isn't high enough, the accuracy isn't good enough, it's not what the tank is designed to do. This, in common with a lot of other of the American medium tanks, in my opinion, is a medium tanker's medium tank, if that makes sense. You really want to play it as a bit of an all-rounder that has gun depression and uses that gun depression to hide most of the hull rather than faffing around with trying to, like, if you want to play a tank destroyer, go and play a tank destroyer, basically. Crew skills, quickly mention them, although it's nothing particularly surprising. With my setup, I do want more view range, so I will be taking recon on my commander as soon as I can. Aside from that, I've got your standard Sixth Sense, Brothers in Arms, Repairs, Smooth Ride, Snapshot, you get the drill. I have got safe storage on this tank. I haven't noticed any particular issues with the ammo rack, but then again, load of skills aren't particularly amazing, so I think safe storage is a pretty reasonable one to get. What will I be looking at when I finally get onto my 4th crew skill, assuming that crew 2.0 hasn't rocked up and ruined all our day at that point? I will be looking at view range and camo. So I will be looking at concealment and recon, essentially, for my crew. So with all that out the way, let's have a look at some gameplay, I suppose. So, gameplay time. Just a reminder, for anyone who maybe hasn't seen these reviews before or hasn't seen them in a while, I'm going to show 2 games to you. One where the matchmaking is more favourable, one where the matchmaking is less favourable, and the idea here is not to show astounding hypercarry games or anything like that, but just to show you decent games in the tank so you can get an idea of what the machine is really capable of, what you can expect from it in a good game, but not so good as to be unrealistic for kind of the average player. So these games would be good games for a kind of average player. You know, any player would be reasonably happy to get a result like this. But like I say, they're not going to be some mega carry or anything. So straight away, we're in a tier 6 match here, and it is a completely tier 6 match. This isn't the best matchmaking, of course, that you can get in your tier 6 tanks. Whilst there are no higher tiers for us to shoot at, there are also no lower tiers for us to shoot at. It's just tier 6s, as far as the eye can see. And we initially put a couple of shots into that A46, but you can see there that we missed some shots as well. Now, whilst the matchmaking's okay, I mean, the matchmaking is sort of middle of the road in this game. By the way, in case you think any of my shots are a little bit derpy, when I played this game I was having some internet connection problems. My internet tends to derp out in the evening a little bit, and that's a bit frustrating because that's kind of the time when I have to play, so never mind. Anyway, the point I was getting at is, ooh, goodbye, Mr. T-34. You can see here that, ooh, he's on fire, poor little sausage. Let's just keep shooting him. Not all my shots are hitting here, and like I said in the when we were looking at the stats, the fully aimed accuracy of this gun is not great. And while the matchmaking in this case is certainly not bad, the map could be better. This is, of course, Ensk. Now, the EZ8 Sherman has 12 degrees of gun depression. Make best use of the armour, you want to be using that 12 degrees of gun depression, and we're on a map that is, broadly speaking, flat as a pancake. So, it sort of swings and roundabouts, and oh, our T-37 is alive. Anyway, we've done 600 damage, we've got 286 assistance, and, you know, we've done alright so far. Just going to put some shots toward this super chaffy, and so far we're just using the DPM of this gun. We get hit by artillery there, which is kind of annoying, but hey-ho. One more shot to finish this guy off. I should reload before he does. There we go. He becomes kill number 2. And we're up to 952 damage. So I want to keep moving, so I really don't want to get slapped by artillery again. That would make me very sad indeed. Looks like next we're probably going to be dealing with... Ooh, there's a KV-2. The T-34-85M. Oh, that KV-2 just took a savage pounding. Now, I switched to APCR for this T-34-85M. Those things have kind of sturdy armour. Oh, and I completely flubbed the first shot. I thought I was... I'm auto-aiming at this guy rather than aiming properly, which is a mistake. But like I said, I was having some internet problems at the time, and I thought that trying to manually aim at that guy in a close-range engagement was just going to go badly wrong for me. So we've fired 3 rounds of APCR. 3. Bear that in mind when you look at the post-battle stats. One of the things about these sort of low alpha pop-pop guns is that what you tend to find with your premium ammunition, your gold ammo, it tends to be very expensive per point of damage done. Oh, take a shot, track that guy at the same time, pick up some assistance while we're doing it. Can we pick up the kill on that KV-1S? Nope, someone else does. So even though we only fired 3 rounds of APCR there, that's kill number 4 by the way, That's going to have a fairly significant impact on our credits at the end. So just bear that in mind. So this game is pretty one-sided. You know, it's a bit of a smash and grab. I'm assuming our friends are going to take out the M44, so I'm kind of trying to head toward the T150 and the Super Chaffee. I'm trying to get in as much damage as I can before this game ends. Would really like to get a decent result, and with the high DPM of the Sherman you definitely can. Ooh, no. Shooting the Super Chaffee, because I can shoot that guy without exposing myself to the T150, whereas the reverse is not necessarily true. Cheeto takes care of him. We don't take care of the T150 actually, the T-34-85M does, which is kind of frustrating. We put some shots towards Stridsvang. The M44's actually moved back over here, so coming down here was definitely the best decision. There's kill number 5, going for the shot on the artillery. I thought maybe I took that shot a little early. That's kind of frustrating, because that missed shot at the end actually, well, we were robbed of a Top Gun at several points. I say robbed, like it was never ours, but you know what I mean. We could have had a Top Gun by getting the killing shot on that M44, or by putting the shot into that T150, but someone else picked up the kill, you know. Or I think there was a T37, someone else picked up the kill. There were a few, like that could have been a Radley's game. It wasn't even a Top Gun in the end, but it doesn't matter. The point is, hopefully you got to see, with okay matchmaking, like the matchmaking could have been better, we weren't shooting any lower tiers, okay matchmaking, but not on a particularly good map, we still managed to pick up 5 kills and a respectable amount of damage. So, bear in mind those 3 rounds of APCR I fired, and didn't damage with all of them, because auto-aim went squiffy, because I was trying to deal with my internet a little bit at the time, or battle with my internet. Bear that in mind when you look at the post-game stats. So there we go, that game ended up being enough for First Class, Fighter, Duelist, Fire for Effect and Bruiser. No big shiny medals there. A little bit of a frustrating game, because as I said, we were actually quite close there to getting, well, a Radley Walters wouldn't have been that far removed from the realms of possibility. But as it is, although we were kind of close to a Radley Walters, we didn't even manage to pick up a Top Gun. It's just the way it goes sometimes. Let's not worry too much about it. It'd be churlish, I think, to complain too much. 1,778 damage, 5 kills, 1,086 base experience puts us at the top of our team. 30 shots fired, 19 hits, 18 pens for that damage count. Most of it was from pretty close range. 4 hits received, 3 penetrated, 1 didn't, but that was just splash from the artillery. 10 enemy vehicles damaged, so we damaged 2/3 of the enemy team. 5 destroyed, 486 assistance. I remember what I was saying about those 3 rounds of APCR really butchering your credit making. We spent 11,000 credits on ammunition in that game, despite the fact the regular AP ammo is less than 100 credits a shot. So we spent about 3,000 credits on armor piercing ammo and the other 7,000 credits on our 3 rounds of APCR. Still made a profit, even with a standard account, but definitely with this sort of gun, this pop-pop gun, using APCR does really eat into your profitability, especially if you're running a standard account, as I am. Anyway, another game for us to jump into. So here we go then in a tier 8 match, so we are definitely at the bottom of the feeding pool. But we're on El Haluf, which is a map on which you can definitely make some use of your gun depression, but this match is, well, it's not going to get off to a great start, let's put it that way. Now, straight away at the beginning, especially when you're bottom tier, it's always worth having a cursory glance at the enemy team. I mean, I would recommend you do that regardless of what match you're in. And straight away we can see that there are 3 artillery. Wonderful. However, although this is a tier 8 match, the tier 8s on their team are not particularly heavily armoured. The one that we're really going to struggle to penetrate is the Stridsvang S1. That guy packs, if memory serves, 30mm of armour sloped back at an auto bounce angle. So, if you have a 91mm gun or bigger, you can deal with that. I don't, so I can't, and straight away there's a Panther. Now I get spotted here, but what I'm going to try and do in a moment, I'm just keeping an eye on what that Panther's doing. I don't really want to unnecessarily expose myself, but on the other hand, if I can spot this Panther, It might allow our team to take this guy out pretty early on into the game, which would be really nice. And there we go, there's some assistance. I don't want to over-commit, though, and make myself a hideously obvious target. Now, unfortunately, well, I say unfortunately, well, the Panther's dead, so that worked. But that does delay us getting into position. The position I've been trying to get into is up close to where that SU-130 PM currently is, but it works out, because if you notice, on the corresponding position for the enemy team, the Stridsvagn S1 has rocked up. Now, I'm just... I can't deal with the Stridsvagn, realistically. Even if I would hit him in the weak spot. I hit him for 115, he hits me for 390. That's an engagement I lose after 3 shots. And that's assuming I hit his weak point. I can't overmatch his armour, I don't have high explosive. This is perhaps where you could argue HE would be useful, but then you could also argue you shouldn't be getting into a fight with an S1 anyway. So, given where that Stridsvagn is, given the tanks they've got there, given the tanks we've got in the location, I have decided that there isn't much I can do over there. And that if I go over there to try and help them, I'm spotted by someone. That surprised me at the time. But anyway, if I go over to try and help them, I reckon I'm just going to be cannon fodder in the breeze. And so I decide instead, I'm spotted again. Must be that CS-44 or the Tiger. Anyway, I decide instead I'm more useful hanging back and trying to get shots on people who are attempting to flank these guys if I can. But I've played these sorts of positions before, and the problem with that approach is you get caught out. You try and get shots on, for example, where the 45 TP and the S1 are at the moment. If you try and get shots on those guys, because they're the ones doing the flanking, you end up exposing yourselves to a lot of bad guys, and you end up essentially dying, and that's bad. So that's actually a really dubious option, and this whole beginning of the fight is actually really awkward. Hello, Tiger 131, we missed that shot. And suddenly, everyone over in that corner's dead. And, yeah, this could be a problem. So, I'm just going to have to bug out of there. I'm trying to take the opportunity to put shots into some of these guys. I'm shooting at Tiger 131 because at least that's a guy I know I have a respectable chance of penetrating from, at range, sorry. But I misjudged this, like, oh, this is some pro driving right here. I get caught on that rock, and the CS-44 flanks round. CS-44, is that a medium tank? I think so. This is, yeah, it is. This is where my lack of familiarity with the Polish, I think that's Polish, where the Polish tech tree is coming in, because I was thinking a CS-44 was a heavy tank, and hence, in fact he might be a heavy tank, no he's not, and hence that he would be slower than that. He catches me off guard, he's a lot faster than I was expecting, and now I'm in an awkward position. So far, my lack of knowledge about the Polish tech tree has bitten me on the backside. And it's just all gone a little bit wrong, but I'm still alive. Scoreline 7-9, which is not great, but we're still in this. We can still win. Our team has actually won the other side of the map. So, like I say, we can still win this. We shouldn't just give up on this situation. Now, it looks like the CS-44 is coming around to be my friend. I put a shot into him, and I'm trying to get under his gun depression, and I'm hoping... we actually get bounced there. I'm hoping my friends here are going to do something about this chap. Bounce on his backside, which is frustrating. And I'm now... ooh, set him on fire. I'm kind of... now that he's on fire, I'm trying to use my DPM to just burn this guy down, no pun intended. And there we go. So we've dealt with that tier 7 medium tank, as it is with no external assistance. And actually that, combined with our allies' actions, means... okay, we just lost our Udes, which is unfortunate. Means that the scoreline is actually... evens at the moment. Now I'm trying to put some damage in onto that Panther 2, but not succeeding. Our S1, sorry, our Udes has died, which is frustrating. I'm trying to keep these guys lit up for artillery, put a shot into the Panther, but it looks like the 87 is coming for me, which is not a bad idea, I guess. And I'm just going to pause this for a second. So, I didn't get a chance to explain at the time because things were a bit hectic and things were happening. So I ended up actually coming into this position when I was running away because I got spotted. Originally, I was hoping to be up there to use my gun depression to poke over the ridgeline, spot people, maybe shoot them, etc. fine. But I get spotted, I get shot, and I don't think if I continue to do that, I think I'm just going to die. I duck into here to get into some cover originally. Now, obviously we then have to deal with the CS-44, but that was my logic at the time. Now the UDES is dead, but we still have a Hummel. If I can keep these guys spotted, the Panther and the 87, a Hummel hopefully will be able to help us. The enemy Tiger 131 seems to have dropped down into the valley, which is a pretty terrible idea in my opinion, because it's now going to take him ages to get into a position where he can do anything effective. That's a really bad position for him to be in at the moment. Now, the 87 bothers me, because if he's coming for me, I realistically can't deal with him from the front. But I need to formulate a plan to deal with that guy, given that we've lost the UDES. And I really wanted that UDES to stick around, because his firepower would be invaluable. So, I'm really worried about the 87, bear that in mind as this plays out. And I'm going to explain what I'm trying to do about the 87 in a moment when we get there. For now, I'm just kind of trying to hide and see if we can spot that Tiger. Now, we actually get spotted, which is suboptimal, but at this point, I'm just going to pause it again, we've basically won. Well, we're in a really good position anyway. We've got 2 tanks capping their base, they've got 1 tank capping ours. The Tiger is down into the valley, he's not going to get himself into a position to interrupt our capture of their base. The enemy artillery could interrupt. That's really the only threat to us capturing their base. So it looks like actually at this point, despite the match being a bit dodgy earlier on, it looks like we should win this. But that doesn't keep me alive necessarily. So, there's the Panther 2. He's still capping, and there's the 87. Now, I've got APCR loaded here. I take 1 shot at his weak point. That's not going to work. Now, this is really why I wanted the APCR. We don't have the UDES anymore. To deal with the 87, I think I've essentially got 2 options. One, I try and flank him and get around his side and rear or something. But I don't like that option because it exposes me to getting shot by the Panther. And that guy these days has 280 alpha, assuming he's using the top gun, and I just go splat. Option 2, if I can keep that guy tracked up on that ridgeline there, and shoot his track and damage him at the same time, then I can just farm him. That's what I'm trying to do. Now, my armor piercing ammo is not going to have the penetration to go through his tracks and his side armor at an angle at once and damage him. It's just not going to happen. But my APCR might. So I'm going to fire some APCR rounds here. And you're going to see it's not going to work quite, but that was my logic. So I've tracked this guy, artillery lands a shot, he puts his track on. Oh, but he's repaired. Oh dear, I get 1 penetration in. I'm trying to go for the track again, he puts in a damaging shot, and now I'm forced to go for it. I really need to flank this guy. I might expose myself to getting shot by the Panther, but the game's almost over and I don't really have an option. Now, I needn't actually still be firing APCR. I could fire AP here and it would work absolutely fine. We actually get a high damage roll at the end there. And it looks like I managed to do it without exposing myself to fire from the Panther. Our team caps, and we win. There we go. So, of the APCR rounds I fired there, they didn't actually do what I wanted them to do. It didn't really get a chance to work. One of the APCR rounds went through what looked like the lower portion of his hull. Probably a high penetration roll, because I think the lower portion of his hull was somewhere around the 200 mark in terms of armour. But I could be wrong. And the shots into the side and rear of the 87 didn't need APCR to penetrate. So, again, I've fired a few rounds of APCR, and I've intentionally... well, this replay I picked partly because I fired some APCR rounds, and I want to highlight what happens to the profitability of this tank if you do. Bear in mind, I did not fire APCR rounds every game that I played in this tank. In fact, I didn't fire them in the majority of games at all. But in those games where I did, the profitability took a significant hit. Anyway, with that said, let's have a look at the post-game stats for this game. So that actually ended up being enough for First Class Mastery, Duelist, Fire for Effect, Bruiser, and a Lavashlios medal, which is awarded for killing tanks that are a higher tier than you while you're in a medium tank. So that actually ended up being a pretty decent game. at the end of the day, which was nice to have and not actually what I was expecting. 1,766 damage and 2 kills actually puts us at the top of the team by experience with 1,030 base XP. And actually you can see that the tier 8s on both teams, despite the fact that this was a tier 8 maximum match, and the tier 8s are the tanks you think you'd worry about, they're also in this case relatively thinly armoured. And so the tier 8s, well, not and so, but the tier 8s didn't actually do all that well. If we look at the enemy team, CS44 tier 7, 45 TP tier 7, blah blah blah, Scorpion, tier 8. That's their top scorer. He came 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th on XP with about 1,500 damage done, which is okay, not great. Panther 2 didn't do particularly well at all, 800 damage from him, and the Slitzfang that I was worried about only seems to have connected probably one shot, 311 damage. And on our team, well, the T-44 was alive at the end. He went with the winning flank, and it seems he wasn't able to achieve much with it. The SU-130PM, 965 damage from him, and the Udez, 1,600 damage from him, and he died. Really, that was about the tier 7s, and a couple of the tier 6s. So, just because your bottom team doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do badly. And remember what I was saying about firing a few rounds of APCR and what it does to your profitability? Yeah. So, 25 shots fired, 22 hits, 13 pens for that damage. Most of it was from close range. 4 hits received, 3 penetrated, 1 didn't. That was just some splash from artillery, I believe. Or maybe it wasn't. Apparently I blocked 300 damage with my armour, so I guess I bounced someone at some point. 5 enemy vehicles damaged, 2 destroyed, 748 assistance damage, and we spent 24,000 credits on ammunition. Which, given that we only made 24,000 credits in that battle overall, yeah, go figure. 5,000 credits to repair the vehicle, so we made a loss of about 5,000 credits. Now, we didn't spray APCR everywhere willy-nilly, but it's just something that's worth bearing in mind. And actually, if memory serves, our ammunition resupply cost should probably be higher than that, because off the top of my head, I think when we played this game, I actually had some APCR rounds that were just lying around. I'd previously purchased in another tank or something. So actually, those ammunition resupply costs, if you were to play that game round again, would actually, I think, be higher. So it's worth bearing in mind, with all of these low alpha guns, when you dab that 2 key, that's going to really start racking up the bill, especially if you don't penetrate all your shots, and when even your gold rounds only have 177 average penetration, you're not going to pen every shot. But in most games, I didn't dab the 2 key, and if you don't need to, you can definitely make consistent monies with this tank being a tier 6 as it is. So there we go, that was the couple of games for you. Let's just go and round things off in the garage. So, overall, I still really like this thing. When I started playing games to kind of get material for this review, I was expecting it to have been power crept, if I'm honest. And I think it has, but not by as much as I was fearing. So I still have fun in this thing. I still enjoy it, and I still do reasonably well. I'm currently rocking a 58% win rate. And although I don't grind marks of excellence, this is the tank that I'm closest to 3 marks on. I think I've got 92, 3, 4% marks on this thing. 93.35, there we go. Which for me is good. And I don't, clearly I don't spam gold everywhere because I don't carry enough gold to do that. So, but I do think this is a decent tank, but these days it's looking a little long in the tooth. What would I do to it? I would probably give this thing a fairly, modest gun handling buff, personally. The penetration is a bit on the low side, but I don't actually think it's as much of an issue as some people will have you believe. I wouldn't want to increase things like the shell velocity, because I think that encourages people to play this thing from longer ranges. I don't think... I just think this thing needs a small gun handling buff, perhaps. But I still have lots of fun in it. I think for most people playing this thing these days, this won't be a machine they choose to keep. this will be something that they get through. It was alright, it wasn't that painful, but they're probably not going to keep. That's my expectation. But like, I still have this thing. I still very much enjoy it. So, yeah, when you get to Tier 7 and the T20, the playstyle is a little bit different. You go from having this little pop-pop gun to having a rather meaty 90mm gun with pretty uninspiring DPM, but you get to slap people around a little bit, and the tank loses all vestiges of armour, the T20 that is, and becomes rather more mobile. But we're not at Tier 7 yet, we're just at Tier 6. So, that's everything I wanted to say about the M4A3E8 here at Tier 6 in the tech tree. I hope you guys enjoyed this review, possibly even found it vaguely informative. If you did, you know what to do by now. And if you don't know what to do, shame on you. There's a subscribe button if you're not subscribed. There's videos popping up you can watch. Blah, 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 blah. You know the drill. And as ever, I wish you very happy hunting on that battlefield. Ciao, ciao.